Pay attention to Rhiannon Skye Whyte, 27 years old, handing out evening snacks to asylum seekers at the Park Inn Hotel in Walsall, England. She has less than 90 minutes left to live. Because Dungchul Majek, who claims to be 19 but whose documents suggest he's actually 27, is watching her from across the cafeteria with eyes that make everyone around him instinctively tense. On this day, Rhiannon just wants to get home to her little boy. On this day, Majek has decided she won't make it. This is the story of 120 seconds that destroyed a family and exposed the darkest celebration caught on camera. Rhiannon Skye Whyte wasn't just working at the Park Inn Hotel in Walsall that October evening. She was living her purpose. Friends described her as the kind of person who remembered everyone's story, who asked how you were doing and actually waited for the answer. She had this infectious energy that made even the longest shifts feel lighter, always cracking jokes with coworkers, always making sure the asylum seekers staying at the hotel felt seen and heard. At 27, Rhiannon had built a life she was proud of. Her son was her entire world, the kind of mom who'd save up for months just to see his face light up on Christmas morning. Her sister Alex later remembered how Rhiannon would FaceTime multiple times a day just to see what her boy was up to make sure he knew how much she loved him. She had dreams too. Talked about going back to school, maybe traveling someday when her son was older. Simple dreams. Beautiful dreams, the kind that make a life worth living. That October evening, she clocked in, like always. Blue hair, bright under the fluorescent lights, that trademark smile already in place. She handed out snacks to the residents, chatted with her colleagues, made plans for later in the week. Just another Sunday shift. Just another night of trying to make people feel a little less alone in a strange country. She had no idea someone was studying her, every movement like prey. The moment everything changed began hours before she ever reached that train platform. It started with a stare that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Across the hotel cafeteria, Dungchul Majek sat alone, hood pulled up despite being indoors, eyes locked. Not a casual glance, not even a lingering look. This was something else entirely. Staff members who witnessed it later used words like predatory and calculating. One colleague said it felt like watching someone plan something terrible in real time. And that instinct turned out to be horrifyingly accurate. The CCTV footage from October 20th, 2024, tells a chilling story. There's Majek, circled in green by investigators, absolutely frozen in his attention on Rhiannon as she works behind the counter, her blue hair visible even in the grainy security footage. And while everyone else in that cafeteria moved, ate, talked, lived their lives normally, he remained completely still. Just watching, just waiting. But Rhiannon wasn't his only focus that evening. 3 different women working that shift reported the same disturbing experience. Eyes wide, expression completely blank. The kind of stare that makes your survival instincts scream even when you can't articulate why. One woman described it as him looking through them, as if they weren't quite real to him, as if they were objects, not people. That description would haunt investigators later, when they understood what came next. On paper, Dungchul Majek was just another asylum seeker in the UK system. Arrived 3 months earlier, housed at the Park Inn, waiting for his claim to be processed. But beneath that surface, beneath the bureaucratic paperwork and the temporary housing, something dark was taking shape. Something that had perhaps been there all along, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. Later that evening, CCTV captured another disturbing moment. Majek brushed past Rhiannon and her coworkers outside the hotel. The car park was nearly empty. Plenty of space to walk around them. But he chose to make physical contact, close enough that the women instinctively stepped back, close enough that they immediately reported it to security, asking them to keep an eye on him. That report went nowhere. Security noted it, life moved on. And Rhiannon's shift continued toward its tragic end. At approximately 11:10 p.m., Rhiannon clocked out, exhausted but upbeat, the way she always was after a long shift. She called her best friend Emma as she started the familiar walk toward Bescott Stadium Station, the route she'd taken dozens of times before. Across the car park, under the motorway, up the bridge to the platform. A 12-minute walk at most. She should have been home by midnight. The CCTV timeline is precise and absolutely devastating. Cameras capture Rhiannon moving through the car park, phone pressed to her ear, completely engaged in conversation with Emma. She's laughing, talking about her night. Making plans. Living. The footage shows her crossing under the motorway and beginning the climb up the pedestrian bridge to the station platform. Then, just 3 minutes later, the same camera captures a second figure, Majek, wearing the exact same jacket, the exact same sandals, the exact same ring that would later be found carrying incriminating evidence. He's following the identical path, but there's something calculated in his movement. At the top of the stairs, he actually pauses. You can see him on the footage, head turning left, then right, checking which direction Rhiannon went before committing to his pursuit. Emma, still on the phone with Rhiannon, heard the entire friendship collapse into nightmare in real time. They were mid-conversation. Rhiannon was probably looking at the train schedule, maybe checking if she'd missed the last one or if she had time to spare. And then Emma said the line just went silent. Not the normal silence of a bad connection or someone getting distracted. This was different. This was wrong. Emma called Rhiannon's name. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. And then, cutting through that terrible silence, came a scream. Emma later told investigators it didn't even sound like Rhiannon at first. It was too high-pitched, too terrified, too raw. It was the sound of someone who'd been caught completely off guard by violence they never saw coming. It was the sound of someone fighting for their life on an empty train platform with no one there to help. The platform cameras, the ones that should have captured everything, mysteriously weren't working that night. A technical malfunction that meant the actual attack happened in a surveillance blind spot. But what investigators later reconstructed painted a horrifying picture. Within those 2 minutes of silence on Emma's phone, Majek launched a brutal and sustained assault using a weapon he had concealed. The attack was frenzied and savage, leaving Rhiannon with catastrophic injuries that gave her virtually no chance of survival. 2 minutes after that scream, CCTV captures Majek casually walking back down the same bridge. No panic, no urgency, no visible signs of distress, just a man out for an evening stroll. In his hand, still lit up from Emma's frantic attempts to call back, was Rhiannon's phone. The footage shows him stopping by the river, looking around briefly, and tossing it in like someone discarding a piece of trash. Eliminating evidence. Covering his tracks, already thinking ahead. What happened next would shock even seasoned homicide detectives who thought they'd seen everything. While Emma frantically tried to understand what had just happened to her best friend, while Rhiannon lay dying alone on a cold train platform, Dengchol Majek was already moving on to the next part of his evening. And that's where this case transforms from tragic to absolutely incomprehensible. CCTV shows him stopping at a convenience store. He browses the beer selection with the casual demeanor of someone who just finished a normal day. Purchases a 6-pack, chats briefly with the cashier. Nothing in his behavior suggests what he'd just done. Nothing indicates the violence still fresh on his hands, the evidence still visible on his clothes. He returned to the Park-In hotel, walking through the same corridors where Rhiannon had worked just hours earlier. And then, in footage that would later be played in court to audible gasps, he started dancing. Not a nervous shuffle or fidgeting movements you might associate with adrenaline. Full celebration, arms raised, moving to music only he could hear, grinning widely. The footage is genuinely disturbing because of how joyful he appears, how satisfied, how utterly pleased with himself. One hotel staff member later testified that his mood had completely transformed. Earlier in the evening, he'd been quiet, withdrawn. Now he was practically buzzing with energy. Detective Superintendent Sarah Thompson would later describe this behavior as very cold-blooded, very odd. Having committed such a horrendous, horrific, savage attack, and how he could then behave afterward in such a jovial way, dancing. I can't get my head around that. But the celebration didn't stop there. CCTV from the hotel car park shows Majek outside with friends, music blasting from a speaker, drinking his store-bought beer, smoking, laughing, living his best life. And in the background of that footage, barely visible but unmistakably present, you can see the flashing blue lights of emergency vehicles. Police and paramedics were right there, less than 200 feet away, fighting desperately to save Rhiannon's life. 2 worlds existing simultaneously. Chaos and celebration, death and dancing. The contrast is one of the most disturbing elements, in a case full of disturbing elements. It wasn't just violence. It was violence followed by joy. It was the absence of any human remorse, any recognition of what he'd done, Staff members said he looked happier than they'd ever seen him, like something that had been building inside him had finally been released. Emma, still clutching her phone and replaying that scream in her mind, couldn't remember the name of the hotel where Rhiannon worked. In her panic, details escaped her. She called Rhiannon's family instead, voice shaking, trying to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. They immediately contacted police, confusion and terror rising with every passing minute of no communication from Rhiannon. By the time officers and paramedics reached Bescott Stadium Station, the train guard had already found her. Unresponsive on the platform, the scene told a tragic story of the violence that had just occurred. Phone gone, life slipping away. The crime scene was exactly as brutal as Emma's scream had suggested. This wasn't a fight that got out of hand. This wasn't an argument that escalated. This was a sustained, deliberate, savage attack on a defenseless woman who'd never done anything but show kindness. Detectives didn't need sophisticated investigative techniques to connect Majek to the crime. The CCTV trail led them directly to his hotel room door like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. Body camera footage from the arrest shows officers waiting outside his room, building entry, and finding him asleep in bed. As if he genuinely believed he'd just slipped through the cracks unnoticed. As if the cameras hadn't captured everything. They didn't even need to search extensively. The evidence was laid out like an exhibition. His jacket, the same one visible in CCTV footage from the platform bridge, was there. His distinctive ring, clear in multiple camera angles, was there. His sandals, the unique pattern visible in enhanced footage, were there. And every single item was heavily stained with incriminating evidence. Not trace amounts, not transfer from incidental contact. Investigators described extensive physical evidence, the kind that only comes from extreme violence. Forensic analysis confirmed what everyone already knew. The biological evidence belonged to Rhiannon. DNA testing found the victim's genetic material present on his person, proving close contact during a struggle. The kind of evidence that's almost impossible to explain away through innocent circumstances. You don't get someone's DNA transferred in this way from a casual interaction. You get it from physical confrontation, from someone fighting desperately to survive. And yet, Majek tried to deny everything. The clothes weren't his. The DNA wasn't his. The man in the CCTV footage, wearing his clothes, his ring, his shoes, following the exact route at the exact time, somehow wasn't him either. Prosecutors called his excuses laughable, and even that seemed generous. The jury was shown the complete CCTV timeline, Majek staring at female staff in the cafeteria, Majek deliberately brushing past the women outside, Majek following Rhiannon to the station, Majek returning minutes after the attack, Majek dancing in celebration while emergency crews fought to save his victim's life. He maintained his innocence throughout. According to his version of events, the cameras were wrong, the forensic evidence was wrong, the timeline was wrong, the DNA analysis was wrong. Police had somehow confused him with himself. The audacity of it forced Rhiannon's family to sit through a full trial, hearing every brutal detail of her final moments when the evidence was so overwhelming that a guilty plea would have been the only reasonable option. Detective Inspector Thompson spoke directly to that choice during her statement. The level of brutality is some of the worst I've seen in my 18 years of service. Her poor family had to hear all of that evidence in court. And I think it's testament to the character of the defendant that he chose to put them through that. He was initially charged with attempted murder, but Rhiannon's injuries were too severe. She spent 3 agonizing days in the hospital while doctors did everything medically possible. Her family never left her side. They talked to her, held her hand, whispered prayers and promises, hoping she might squeeze back, hoping for any sign that she could hear them, that she was still fighting. But the damage was catastrophic and irreversible. The trauma she'd sustained left no possibility of recovery. On October 23rd, surrounded by everyone who loved her, Rhiannon Skye Whyte took her final breath. The charges against Majek were upgraded to murder. As investigators built their case, Majek's background became increasingly murky. Every detail they uncovered seemed to contradict the last. In court, he claimed to be 19 years old, born in 2006. But when prosecutors obtained his German identity documents, they showed a completely different date of birth, January 1st, 1998. That would make him 27 years old, almost a full decade older than he claimed. When confronted about the discrepancy, Majek shrugged it off with a convenient explanation. The German authorities had guessed his age. He insisted they'd gotten it wrong. But the pattern of deception didn't stop there. German records showed his asylum application had already been denied before he left. He wasn't a newly arrived refugee with nowhere else to go. He was someone who'd been rejected and decided to try his luck elsewhere. His travel history raised even more questions. He claimed to have left Sudan at 16, said he'd lived in Libya, said he'd passed through Italy and Germany, but none of the details aligned. Official records showed he'd only been in the UK for 3 months before Rhiannon's murder. 3 months of housing, support, and assistance. 3 months that ended in the most violent betrayal of the kindness he'd been shown. The age discrepancy became crucial to the case. In the UK legal system, a defendant's age at the time of the crime directly affects their minimum sentence. If Majek was 19, as he claimed, he'd face different sentencing guidelines than if he was actually 27. The court needed to determine the truth, but Majek's conflicting documents made that nearly impossible. Medical age assessments can provide estimates, but they're not precise enough to settle the question definitively. While Majek sat in jail awaiting trial, Rhiannon's family tried to process their new reality. Her sister Alex had to explain to Rhiannon's young son why his mother wasn't coming home. She initially told him that mommy had a poorly brain and the doctors tried really hard, but they couldn't fix it, so she had to go to heaven. Alex later described his reaction in court testimony that left the gallery in tears. The scream that left that child that day will haunt me for the rest of my life. A little boy's world had been shattered by violence he was too young to understand, by a stranger's choice to take his mother away from him forever. The family called those 3 days in the hospital hell on earth, watching someone they loved slip away while machines beeped and doctors delivered increasingly grim updates. What made everything harder to bear was Majek's complete lack of remorse. He never took responsibility, never apologized, never showed a flicker of emotion or regret throughout the entire trial. Detective Thompson noted that throughout the proceedings, they were given no reason as to why he chose Rhiannon, no accountability for his actions, and no remorse. Rhiannon's father spoke directly to that absence of humanity. None of this deportation. I'm not against asylum seekers, whatever, but he's taken my daughter away. He doesn't deserve to be sent back to his own country, serve his time here. The family wanted real accountability. No technicalities, no deportation that would feel like escape, just for him to spend the rest of his life behind bars paying for what he'd done. Life for a life. No. The trial presented overwhelming evidence. CCTV footage tracking Majek's movements throughout the entire evening. Forensic analysis confirming biological evidence and DNA. Witness testimony about his disturbing behavior in the hours before the attack. The timeline matching perfectly with Emma's phone call. The celebration captured on camera while emergency crews fought to save Rhiannon's life. After hearing all the evidence, the jury deliberated for just 2 hours and 5 minutes. They returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty of murder. Guilty of possessing a screwdriver as an offensive weapon. Majek stood in the dock as the verdict was read, and according to courtroom observers, he didn't flinch. Not a single expression crossed his face. No surprise. No anger. No fear. Just the same blank stare that had unnerved everyone who'd seen him watching Rhiannon that October evening. There were gasps and tears of relief from Rhiannon's family and friends in the gallery. Justice had been served in the verdict, but the sentencing created new complications. The court scheduled his sentencing for December 15, 2025, but that date came and went. The hearing was adjourned to January 30, 2026. The reason? The court needed more time to determine Majek's exact age. That question remained unanswered, suspended in bureaucratic uncertainty while a family waited for closure. The age determination wasn't just administrative detail. It would directly affect the minimum number of years Majek would serve before being eligible for parole. The difference between 19 and 27 could mean additional years of incarceration, additional years before he could even apply for release. The court ordered additional medical assessments, dental examinations, bone age studies, every test trying to answer a question that should have been simple but had become impossibly complex due to conflicting documents and deliberate deception. Rhiannon's case sent shockwaves through the UK, but it wasn't isolated. Just months later, in May 2025, another tragedy made headlines. Habi Kabdiraxman Nur, an asylum seeker from Somalia whose application had been rejected 4 months earlier, randomly and unprovokedly attacked 37-year-old Gurvinder Singh Johal while he stood in line at a Derby bank. The assault proved fatal. The CCTV footage from that attack showed chilling similarities. No buildup, no argument, just sudden, explosive violence against a complete stranger going about his daily routine. Noor pleaded guilty and received a life sentence, but the damage was done. Another family destroyed. Another life taken by someone who'd been housed and supported through the asylum system, only to repay that kindness with murder. The two cases, coming so close together, shined an uncomfortable light on the UK's asylum vetting and monitoring procedures. How were dangerous individuals slipping through? What red flags were being missed? How many more violent offenders were hiding in a system designed to help people escaping genuine persecution? The British government responded with policy changes, tightened screening procedures, enhanced background checks, improved information sharing between European countries, better mental health assessments for asylum seekers, increased security at temporary housing facilities. All important steps, but all coming after the fact. After Rhiannon, after Gurvinder, after families were already broken beyond repair. The uncomfortable question remained. If these cases happened before the rules were strengthened, how many other dangerous individuals are still out there? How many other Majiks are sitting in temporary housing, watching, waiting, planning? The UK asylum system processes thousands of applications annually. Most are legitimate refugees fleeing genuine persecution. But it only takes one violent individual to destroy multiple lives, and the screening process clearly had gaps that allowed dangerous people through. Emma still hears that scream sometimes. The one that came through the phone line in Rhiannon's final moment. The sound of her best friend fighting for her life while Emma stood helpless miles away, unable to do anything but listen. It's the kind of trauma that doesn't fade with time, that replays in quiet moments, that transforms ordinary phone calls into triggers. Rhiannon's son is growing up without his mother. He'll have to rely on stories and photographs to remember her smile, her laugh, the way she made even ordinary moments feel special. Alex and the rest of the family are left with an absence that never gets easier, a missing person at every holiday and birthday and milestone. The kind of grief that doesn't heal, it just becomes part of who you are. The Park Inn Hotel, where Rhiannon spent her final shift trying to help people, will forever be marked by what happened. Her coworkers remember her laughter in those hallways. They remember her kindness, her energy, her genuine care for the asylum seekers she served. And they'll always wonder if there was something more they could have done, some warning sign they missed, some way they could have prevented what came next. Bescott Stadium Station, a place thousands of people pass through every week, now carries the weight of Rhiannon's final moments. The platform where she died, the bridge Majek followed her across, the river where he disposed of her phone, ordinary places transformed into monuments of tragedy. As of January 2026, Dengchul Majek sits in a British prison awaiting his formal sentencing. The exact minimum term he'll serve remains undetermined, suspended in the legal limbo of his unverifiable age. His defense continues to insist he's 19, born in 2006. The prosecution maintains evidence suggests he's actually 27, born in 1998. Medical experts analyze bone density and dental development, trying to extract truth from a body that won't give clear answers. But regardless of his age, regardless of the final minimum term, one truth remains absolute. Rhiannon Skye Whyte was 27 years old when she died. She had dreams she'll never achieve, places she'll never visit, moments with her son she'll never experience. She'll never see him graduate, never meet his future partner, never hold her grandchildren. All of that possibility, all of that future, stolen in 120 seconds of violence on a train platform. The celebration Majek performed in those hotel corridors, dancing and grinning with evidence still visible on his clothes, revealed something more terrifying than the attack itself. It showed the complete absence of human empathy. It showed someone who didn't just commit violence but derived joy from it. Someone who could take a life and immediately celebrate that taking, like it was an accomplishment worth commemorating. Emma's final phone call with Rhiannon, cut short by a scream that still haunts her, represents the fragile line between safety and tragedy. How quickly an ordinary evening can transform into nightmare. How someone can be laughing one moment and fighting for their life the next. How the people we love can be taken away in an instant by violence we never see coming. Rhiannon's family continues advocating for justice, for policy changes, for recognition that her life mattered beyond statistics and policy debates. They want her remembered not just as a victim, but as the vibrant, caring, beautiful person she was. The mother who loved her son fiercely, the sister who called multiple times a day, the friend who always listened, the coworker who made everyone feel valued, the woman who believed in helping people even when it cost her everything. The case remains open in one sense. The sentencing has been delayed, pushed to late January 2026, while the court determines facts that should have been simple. But the verdict is final. The guilt is established, and somewhere in a prison cell, Dungchul Majek sits, knowing he'll likely never walk free again, his celebration captured on camera, his crime proven beyond any doubt, his future measured in decades of confinement. For Rhiannon's family, no sentence will ever feel adequate. No number of years can restore what was taken. No legal proceeding can undo the trauma or fill the absence or erase that scream from Emma's memory. But they take small comfort in knowing he was caught, that the dancing celebration that seemed so triumphant actually sealed his fate, that the cameras he didn't account for told the truth he tried so desperately to deny. This is the story of 120 seconds that changed everything. A phone call cut short, a woman who deserved so much better, a killer whose celebration exposed his guilt, and a system that failed to protect someone who'd spent her final hours trying to help others. Rhiannon Skye Whyte's name deserves to be remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived. With kindness, with purpose, with love that still echoes in everyone who knew her.